Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name's Glenn Keller, and in this series, what we are going to be talking about is Teamcenter administration. We're going to be talking about this with respect to applications that are provided using the Active Workspace Client interface. So in this demo, we're going to be highlighting or providing an introduction to each one of these components, and then we'll dive deeper into each one in future videos. So to begin with, right now I'm in the Active Workspace Client, and that's where the focus of this demo is going to take place. There are administrative applications in the Rich client, and you can feel free to jump over there and utilize those, but go forward, Active Workspace seems to be the client that Siemens is investing in. So one of the things that we need to understand with administration inside of Active Workspace is each of the locations, Workflow Designer, Preferences, People, and those types of things are restricted to only a very specific workspace or set of workspaces out of the box, and only DBAs can access those. Now, your environment may have moved or enabled those pages to be available outside of those workspaces, but in general, what I need to do is I am logged in as user 01, so I don't have a group of DBA in here, which is my engineering group, so I'm going to go ahead and sign out. And then I'm going to sign in with my DBA user. In this case, just the standard out-of-the-box user. Now, at this point, I can log in and I can see that it takes me directly to a different set of tiles. So what it's done is logging in as DBA, I have Active Admin as my workspace. So you can do administrative type tasks in both Active Architect as well as Active Admin, whereas Active Architect is more dedicated to customizing the interface and Active Admin is more dedicated to administering the interface. Author would be what your normal users use. So right now it's got me in Active Admin by default. I can switch between the two and get different tiles. You can see Active Architect will have things like my XRT editor for style sheets. But in here, you need access to these. So to begin with, the different functionalities that are available in the system are things like controlling your organization. Going in and controlling access rights has now been added to the Active Workspace environment. You can work with workflows, design new workflows, set them up for available to your users to submit to, set up release statuses, and more. The table configurator is a newer feature that allows you to control some of the table column configurations across the system. The query builder will help you build advanced query definitions. Viewer administration gets into more of the infrastructure side of the house in accessing and viewing if your visualization system is up and running. Indexer and search administration will help you with tuning that global search and the results that come out of it. Assignment lists will help you automate some of the workflow tasks that need to be done when you submit, like selecting individuals. And then if we switch over to the Active Architect workspace, the Workflow Designer is duplicated here. It can be kind of used across those roles, but you'll see things like the Advanced Multi-Schema Exchanger, which we can get into in much later videos. Table configurator is still an overlap, query builder is still an overlap, but we get the XRT editor, which helps us modify some of the style sheets or the looks and feel of the properties of the objects when we stand on them. So we get a little bit more functionality here. One thing that I did note that if I switch back to Active Admin, one thing that I did note here is that my preferences are not listed in this display. So as we go through this, we're also going to learn how to identify what's missing and how to go about adding it using Deployment Center. All right, so if we dive into each one of these are called application administrative type tasks. So your application administrator or your administrator will know how to interact with these. And for some of them, like the people one, where you're only building and interacting with users and groups and roles, this can be done by a higher level individual, somebody that's more focused on the processes of getting people assigned, maybe a help desk. but you're really just creating the structure of the organization, who can be where. And then you do have some attributes in the organization to apply additional security, like whether you're internal or external, whether you have DBA privilege, what have you. And then you can see the individuals that are inside of that group or role. So in here, the People app has changed a little bit throughout the different releases of Active Workspace. So we do now have a tree, but you can also switch to list, table, or view. List, table, or images, depending on your preference. The tree seems to be the only way that I like to work with it. Siemens has also went along the way of adding additional buttons up in the context here, so you can quickly add a role or add a group, versus having to come all the way over to the right side and saying new and then add from there. So a couple of little enhancements. You can also now search the organization. So if I do user 01 and hit enter, I can see that I get the user 01 locations in the organization, and I can clear that out afterward. Any of these elements you can edit by coming into the edit option. So if I wanted to add a description to the engineering group, I'll just type engineering group, and maybe I'll set the security to internal. I can choose save here, and I can modify some of the elements inside of this pane. As we get deeper into the use cases for this in future videos, you can come in and start playing around with editing from this panel, adding groups, roles, subgroups, and others, and then going in and seeing what other tools that you have available to you. So the People location helps us with the organization. The Access Manager location helps us with rules. So what these are essentially a if-then statement that applies a set of rules. So for instance, in this case, this line evaluates whenever you select anything. So no matter what you're doing, accessing a page, clicking an object, checking something out, creating an object, this rule tree is going to get evaluated per action. And in this case, you can see the first check in it is your group sponsor? And if it is, then it applies a set of rules. So if it is sponsor, then it applies a set of rules. Those set of rules are called an ACL. And the definition of that ACL is defined there. So in this case, if you were a sponsor, you would get the associated rules. In this case, you wouldn't have access to do pretty much anything except for look at the data. So as we get into this, we'll look at some of the menu bars across the top, being able to edit both the ACL definition as well as the rule tree definition on the left. We'll learn how to import and export rule tree definitions for safety and really look at some of the nuances with how this tree is interpreted top down and children first, and then we'll get into some use case examples for it. Now, as the Active Workspace Client has kind of grown over the last few years, Access Manager was added. There is also a mechanism that you can turn on to see access rules in place when you're navigating objects. Workflow Designer is something that we had, same with Access Manager and People or Organization. Workflow Designer is an application that we also had in the Rich Client that's been brought over. And if you go into the Workflow Designer application, you can see that you basically get a list of all your workflows inside of the system. You can select a workflow, and based on what you select, it will actually bring up the workflow in the display. You can zoom in and out, kind of move it around if you want, and all of the properties are kind of generated down at the bottom here. Right here, we have properties, whether or not you need an access control list associated to the process of the task, your workflow handlers, and actually in the workflow handlers, there's a cool addition for those of you that have been working with this in the past, where you can get a help link and a list of values for the actual arguments. It really saves time and help, so I'm really happy with that feature. When you go into notifications, you can set up email notifications, assignments. You can set up list arrangements for the tasks and what happens underneath of them. Up at the top here, they've provided some different things, different features that we haven't had before. So first of all, I can shut off the task information to give myself a little bit more room. I can work with diagram settings to show the grid. I can do minor lines or major lines. I'll start with major. Hit apply, and you can see it lines my grid up so I can snap things and move things around to match that grid. So the interaction for this, I think, is a lot better than what it was. And just remember, you can also do this, or you can go into the layouts and really make a layout of it. So I could say generate BOM design and hit open. What's cool is they give you the ability to align the layout. So if you have a big workflow, you can say top to bottom or left to right logically, and it will adjust for you. Trying to take the time out of designing the actual where the tasks go and just kind of working on the logic of it. And you can actually save those layouts out. You can edit them and so much more. So as we get in deeper to this, we will look at the Workflow Designer application as well. And as we move off from that, the table configurator, we used to have to use a utility in association to some XML files and map out all of the tables that we saw in the system. So what we're referring to here is if I go over to the author location and pull up a search, maybe I do 090 star, then in here you get a table that comes out if you switch to it. Right now it's in list form. I'm going to switch to table, and this is the table that we're referring to. So if you wanted to control this table, in the newer versions, you don't have as much of a need to do this, except for some out-of-the-box settings, because users have more columns and they can build out their own column configurations as needed. However, in the newer versions, there is an ability where if you switch over to that active admin location, the table configurator, when opened, is going to provide you the different places or different tables that are configured in your system. So how this helps is if I do the search, you can see that the advanced search results table, recent search results table, search results table, which is your global search, are all listed here. You can see there's a site-wide set of settings, and the table configuration itself has all of these properties. So in the past, we had this pretty lengthy XML file that we exported out with a utility, and now we can simply add properties to it and really get into the setting up the columns the way that we need them to be. Making our way across, we've got Query Builder here. This is one that was in the Rich Client's been brought over. I think they've done a pretty good job with it as well. So the audit, I'm just selecting a query from the left-hand side. We still have our logic here. If you're new to it, this is where you define the logic of the query. If it has an ID equal to this and a name of this or a date released of this, then return a set of results. It's kind of like a SQL query if you're used to working inside of a database. So in addition to that, we can see those query definitions, but we can also edit them or create new definitions altogether. So I'm going to come up to the top, and you can see we can create a query here or create a new query from a query using Save As New Query. If I say create query, it basically just kind of gives you name of query that you want to provide, and then you can define what kind of object you want to search on, and you can go down into the relationships like you could in the Rich Client. So we'll dive into some use cases for the Query Builder. The Viewer Administration tile is going to give you access to the viewer tools. We have ours off at the moment, but for the examples, we'll dive in, we'll turn them on, we'll show you what we have access to with the visualization system. If you get something like this when you open it up, they're either off or inaccessible. So then I'm just going to go ahead and kill that, and let's go back to the home. We have Indexer and Search Administration, which used to be more of an infrastructure type task and still kind of is, but it provides you a makeshift overview of what has been indexed, when did the indexes occur, when was the last time something had changed, as well as a nice little chart here. If you go into Diagnostics, you've got a query where you can search for objects to see if they're in the search. So if I do the 090, and hit get indexing status. Notice it says no results found, try a different criteria. So if I do star and do it again, nothing. The reason is because it's searching item ID. Items aren't indexed. So in here, if I do a search for some object with a name, I should be able to identify it, but I've got some different attributes here, so I'll clear all. We'll try that one more time. Do get indexing status, and you can see I've got one past object that is in my index, and I can see that object. I can see any failed or pending objects as well that may match that, and I can help to alleviate the issue or at least identify the issue if somebody's saying they can't find anything. Switching back over, almost made it through this. The assignment lists work with the workflows, so we can get into this as we get through the workflow designer lesson, but essentially you're just coming in and saying, I want to create a new assignment list here. I want to base it on whatever template, and then I give it a name. So I say test. I add it, and it creates it, and then you can say, okay, I want to go ahead and begin to edit this. So I'm going to come in and notice I can create a report against it. I can edit it or save edit. It says I'm working through it. But what I'm doing here is essentially adding elements for each of the tasks that are there. Now, this was a terrible example because this doesn't have any tasks to do. So if I discard that, you can see that it pops up the workflow itself. And then I can go to assignments, and this is where the assignment list would be provoked. So we'll go through that whole process after we create a couple of custom workflow processes and really show you the power behind it. And then finally, and I promise we're getting closer to the end of this video, if we come into Active Architect, you have some of the same ones, so we're not going to go through those again. We'll talk about Advanced Multi-Schema Exchanger in some of our PLM XML lessons later in the year. And then XRT Editor is another one that administrators may use and probably will use pretty often. What it does is it opens up an editor, which if you then navigate to another workspace for, and then open up an object, what it provides is a set of code that defines what you see in the system. And that code is called a style sheet. So for instance, I'm standing on a folder at the moment, and this page here defines a table, some commands, and a couple of sections. So the actual definition of these pages, these sections, everything that you see in this area, which is called the summary or work area, is going to be defined in that editor now. So you can see at the top, when I click that, it opened up a second tab. I'm driving it with the first tab, and it's showing me a little bit about the information on that page. I can navigate fairly easily on the left, and I can see the definition here. And Siemens has really provided the API set for this, or at least the documentation for each of the arguments you can use. And we'll get into how to define it, but it will tell you everything kind of associated to it. So there's a lot to do with this, and then in addition to learning all of these different components, we are also going to get into the administration data tools and learn how to take the administration data out of a system and put it into another system, and then look at some of the side effects, the things that maybe you don't account for. Maybe it updates passwords of users that are associated to the data, or maybe it only pulls the data in if there's no collision, and we can look at merge options for that. So we hope you enjoy this administration data overview, and hope you enjoy the subsequent videos as we dive deep into Teamcenter 2506.